Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Convery, where we caffeinate your curiosity with bold stories, actionable insights, and fresh takes on how we define and design success. Today's episode is all about breaking the mold, deconstructing the old ways of hiring, and reimagining what recruitment can look like in an age of ethical AI, human connection, and smart technology. My guest today is Nick Mastromattei, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer at Picsume, the Windsor-based tech company transforming how employers and job seekers connect. Nick is a seasoned technical product manager, solution architect, and an AI advocate with over 15 years of experience leading digital innovations for global organizations from Ticketmaster to Harvard and Steelcase. At Picsume, Nick is the architect behind the platform's powerful bias-reduced AI, proving that when you combine technology with empathy, you don't just build better systems, you build a better way to connect people and work. Nick, welcome to Coffee with Convery.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here, and that makes me sound yeah,
Impressive.
pretty impressive. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
That's awesome. Well, you are impressive.
Yeah.
So we'll start with a few rapid fire questions and then we'll jump right into everything else. So what do you think is your superpower?
Yeah, so I think my superpower is identifying relationships in things that aren't necessarily obvious, or you might not find it. So, how one thing might relate to another that
Yeah,
doesn't have always a common denominator.
that's awesome. That is a superpower. That is, and when you put that into play, there's a lot of power with that.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe
That's
we'll talk
awesome.
about that.
Yeah, absolutely. School, doesn't matter if it's high school, university, whatever, but what was your favorite sort of go-to subjects?
Yeah, admittedly, I wasn't an A plus student, and
Me
so
either.
I was B's, B's get in there, and a few of those. I've got a few A's, and that was good. I think my favorite subject in high school was definitely physical education, PE.
Yeah,
That was one of the things that I thrived in, of course, with my athletic background, and of course we had some computer classes and things like that that went through. For college, I got into the marketing side later on in my career and started to understanding how you know, products influ or marketing influence the success of products and how what that meant to businesses and how to incorporate sales in that part. And
yeah.
so that's really what started my journey on understanding the product market fit and what that meant for technology.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
We all start somewhere with our first job, some paid, some unpaid, but what was your like very first job you did?
Yeah. So my very first job was a stadium attendant for a indoor soccer facility. And so it
Okay.
was put on. This facility was created by the Italian Canadian Handicapable Association, and in conjunction with the a public venue. So it was the first indoor soccer stadium in Windsor, and it was recently built. And my mom said, "Go and apply. See, go walk in there and see if you can get a job." I was 14 years old. I learned to sweep the floors,
Yeah.
clean the dressing rooms, make sure people got checked in and checked out. And in between time, got to kick the soccer ball around a little bit on the
That sounds like
field.
a totally good first job for you.
Perfect first job for a 14-year-old. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, in that environment too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Um, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Empathetic.
Empathetic. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah, that would be my one word.
awesome. All right, let's take us all back to where it started. You first sparked your passion for technology. Where did you first spark your passion for technology and product design?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to when I was 3 years old. That's as far back as I can remember. My dad was always in controls engineering,
Yeah.
and he was at the beginning, the forefront of robotics. And I remember him bringing home this briefcase. We always had a computer at home, but I remember this briefcase that he had that was actually a computer inside a briefcase, and playing with it on the dining room table and learning how to enter a game in DOS, putting in those big floppy disks, not just the small ones that came, but the big ones at the beginning, and running my first games on there and learning how to get it booted up at 3 years old. So that's where my journey in technology began. And then through there, as technology advanced, I started learning through him, about robots specifically, but then
Okay.
getting into things like building my own website as the internet came out, building tools in like Microsoft Access or Visual Studio that allowed you to visualize and put together elements and components on a screen. And I always thought that was fascinating.
Amazing. And then you moved on in your career from web development to project management into leadership roles, shaping strategy, design, and innovation. How did that evolution come about through your journey?
Yeah, so I actually went to university my first year for computer science.
Okay.
And there I realized I had written an exam, and I remember in this exam, I was writing code with pencil. And I was like, man, this is not for me. I'm like, this code should be on a computer. And it just didn't map up with what I wanted to accomplish and what I wanted to learn. And so essentially, I took that understanding and, as I mentioned, I transitioned to college to the business and marketing program. So
Hmm.
I felt like I had enough tech background that I said, okay, I can carry this into a different medium and start to understand, how the sales and marketing part played a factor in technology. And so once I graduated, I immediately stepped into the point of first digital marketing. So that was, in the early 2009, and when websites became a big factor. Digital marketing, so social media ads, social media marketing, these type of things were becoming a very important presence for businesses. And so I actually started my first company, Mastro Marketing, which ultimately became Mastro Digital in 2009. So it was almost 17, 18 years now. So I
Amazing.
I got my first project with a local construction company, Accent Construction, and we turned them from Accent Construction into Accent Outdoor Living. And the gentleman there, his name was Rob DeVellis. He was an amazing mentor for me, and he gave me my first start to say, "Yeah, Nick, let's do it together." And we did everything from redoing a website to logo to branding to digital ads to
Nice.
magazine ads and everything in between. And that was really how I began my career, and ultimately then started working on other small projects and things like that. I had started a company that early on that was a software for sports teams to help manage their clubs, and that was called Locker Room. Ultimately, I evolved that into a marketplace for finding sports in your city, which was called Active City. And that helped to, allow people to go on, find different activities, different sports in their area. And that started specifically in Windsor. And then that process of it led me into understanding how to work with developers remotely. I was working at that time with developers in Estonia and throughout Europe
Yeah.
to build these products as an owner. And then what I really started to find it was like, hey, I want to do this at a larger scale. So I said, what companies are hiring remotely? And this was way before remote was even a thing. I said, I know if I want to stay in Windsor, I want to stay close to my family. I'm going to need to figure out how to do this, but work with larger companies and larger organizations. And that's what led me to my starting my career at a company called Modern Tribe. So
Amazing.
Modern Tribe, yeah, I guess I'll tell a little bit about
Yeah,
that. Modern
sure.
Tribe
Yeah.
was one of the largest WordPress organizations or agencies in the entire world at the time. And so
Okay.
when I started there, I was actually a QA analyst. So I was testing WordPress websites, and all my previous businesses were built on WordPress. And so I was very familiar. I was already building my own products. And so I jumped in there. When I started with the company, we were a team of 30, and we were working on some really great projects, at Harvard, Steelcase, Ticketmaster. I was able to work with some really great enterprise projects and started to learn the ins and outs of really building great sustainable products within enterprise. And from there, I transitioned into what we would call early on, before product owner was a thing, was a strategist. So really understanding the business requirements of the clients and customers and applying those to WordPress and the specific frameworks and technology that we were working with at the time. And so that's where I moved my transition, and ended up working there for just over 5 years.
Hmm.
When I left, I was leading a team there, and it had grown to the company to over 130 employees
Wow,
at the time. So it grew fast. We worked on great projects, and I really, really enjoyed my time when I was working there.
amazing. What's really cool too is about your story and your journey is so much at each stage as you're moving through, there's that entrepreneurial spirit inside of you that is constant, right? That's your constant, your mindset's there, the entrepreneurial spirit's there. And so how did that journey prepare you for stepping into Pixame?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So all throughout, I had always kind of spun up my own opportunities. Even when I had left Modern Tribe, I went in and I actually started a raw dog food company. Was a co-founder of a company that we shipped house plants all across Canada. So during COVID, when COVID happened, I partnered one of the larger greenhouses here locally, and we decided, hey, listen, I'll build the website, I'll get all the digital side set up, and you guys ship the plants. And so we had launched a company that was called Piante Plants through COVID, and it was actually did really well and
I
was
bet.
successful throughout the process. And then I realized that my part was already done, so I handed it back over to the greenhouse team, and they actually ran it for the next 4 years afterwards. And so that kind of always burned bright within me, that entrepreneurial spirit, starting businesses really from the 0 to 1. I love that process of like ideation, coming up, really launching things was a big part of my passion. And so when uh, Pixame came along, Jordan and Joshua had brought this idea up, and I said, "Wow, this is really something interesting." And we took some time to ideate and hash it out. But yeah, that entrepreneurial spirit was had already been burning bright before we even got into Pixame.
Awesome. And and your the role in thinking about being a product strategist, you're always bridging that vision and execution. Um, and for some people, that's a tough thing to do, right? It's one thing to vision and think about it, but then actually implementing and doing it. What does that balance look like in practice for you when you look at things?
Yeah. The balance in practice for bridging these ideas is being curious. So I think curiosity is the beginning of that, really starting to understand the client, the person, and the problem. So I know, Brian, you always talk about people, process, technology, right? And
Yeah,
so I always resonated with that because you have to understand the person and the stakeholders first, right? You have to understand the people that are behind or struggling with the problem. And that's where, you asked me to describe myself in one word, is empathy. So put yourself in their shoes, really start to understand it from their perspective. And that is where bridging this gap between technology and business requirements begins, is really starting in that person's shoes and understanding deeply how they are affected by the problem. And then what follows is understanding the relationship between what you've heard from that person and
yeah,
what you know specifically about the industry or the specific company and their workflows, and how that relates to technology or the technology that you're going to use to solve the problem. And I think that's where, as we talked about earlier, where relationship comes into play. If you can best identify how what you've heard applies to what you know, then you will start to find success in bridging that gap between vision or something that's intangible to something that ultimately is, well, code is not tangible, but you get to click around a website and know that your problem is being solved afterwards.
yeah, absolutely. I think the thing about you and what you shared earlier about empathy, and you reiterated it now too, is why you stay grounded in that real human needs of innovation. And I think that's really a super great quality of you because you can just chase the next big tech thing and get so caught up in that you forget that what is it for, right? Is it to do something better for humanity or to create something different? How how do you stay grounded in that? Because there's so many cool, sexy tech things going on sometimes. How do you stay grounded in all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially nowadays, like, isn't it
Yeah,
crazy how fast things are moving? It's like
big
every
time.
day you turn around, there's a new technology, a new tool, a shiny object, right? It's like,
Yeah,
hey, that'll solve all my problems. But we realize real quick that As we were working on some of these really big projects, you kind of get this humility and understanding of that the code that you write today is so temporary. The code,
Hmm.
even the problems that you're solving are so temporary.
Yeah,
The solutions that you put in place, that code might be rewritten in a month, in 2 months, in
that's
five
true.
months. And that, it's not like a house. You build it and it's meant to last,
Yeah.
numbers of years, hopefully, into the hundreds, but not always anymore, right? And so if you relate that to what you're creating with code, maybe a website is good for 3 to 5 years, maybe an app even less, right? Because of how things are evolving and changing. So if you really think of it that way, then and you start to go back to, well, who are the people using these tools or
Right.
solving the problems with them? And that's what stays, right? The problems that you're solving, the people that you're supporting in it, that is what perpetuates. And if you understand that you're solving this with people and then the technology is secondary, then it helps you to really get closer to, okay, this technology I'm going to put in place now. It might change, it might evolve, but the problem and the people are going to stay the same. And so I think that's where it's an important caveat of understanding that the technology is later. Say just do what suits best, do what you know, do what you understand, but make sure that it solves the problem because no one really cares about the code behind it.
Some great insights and mindset for some of our listeners to think about. I really appreciate that you sharing that. It makes a lot of sense. It gives a real world perspective on why we do what we do. So let's talk about the birth of Pixme.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
every great startup starts with a shared problem, and I'm curious, what was your first reaction when Jordan and Joshua approached you with the idea that became Pixme? What did you feel like? Were you excited?
Yeah, so I remember the day pretty vivid. I think we were building a deck and we were
Yeah,
working on something and it was in the middle of COVID. So I know that for sure.
yeah,
And Jordan said to me, he's like, "Hey, Josh and I worked on this thing, years ago. I had heard about it a few times,
yeah.
but I was like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, that's a good idea. But it was really much just I thought it was just a past project and it was brushed along. But during COVID, we saw such a huge drastic change in
Yeah.
work, right? It was like the rug was swept out from everyone. And so if you were working in a building, in a factory, in a process, like everything changed
Night.
relatively speaking, overnight. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And Jordan came to, he's like, I think we have an opportunity here to like rethink what this looks like from what we had done 11 years ago or whatever we
Yeah.
had started. But I think there's something here. And I remember thinking like, yeah, I definitely felt in my gut that this problem was something that was going to perpetuate because of the shift that we had experienced.
Mhm.
And it was going to grow and expand. And really the basis of hiring has not changed very much. Like we talk about, you had a PDF or a resume that was on paper. Now really they're just papers inside of a web screen. You're just reading a resume, a
Same
PDF
thing.
on a
Yeah.
screen. And I said, yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense. And there's a ton of opportunity here. But we also spent a ton of time to say, okay, what is the opportunity? It's not what was created, 10 years ago. There's something here, but it has to be for the time and for the people and for the problem that's being experienced now. And so, yeah, I was definitely excited, but the excitement was more, let's dig into this. Let's explore, let's identify what it really means.
Back to curiosity.
Back to curiosity. Yeah, for
There you
sure.
go. See, these things keep coming back around, right?
Yeah,
And that's why when they do, you got to embrace them, right? Don't push them off.
that's right.
As a technical architect, you were us, what were some of the big challenges turning this bold idea into reinventing the resume into more of a functioning, scalable thought product idea for you?
Yeah. In the earliest stage, we identified that we couldn't make a giant leap. It had to be incremental and pragmatic, right? So you couldn't take this idea, which was just a piece of paper, and say, okay, we're going to get rid of that altogether.
Yeah.
And say, oh, we don't need this idea of what the resume was. If that would be too great of a shift for how the majority of the people right? Going back to people, would implement these processes. And so if you had too great of a shift, then you would not have any adoption because people would feel intimidated by it, or you'd only have a smaller portion of a segment, like the early adopters that would
Yeah.
bring this on. So you had to make it familiar enough and approachable enough, and then be able to make it pragmatic that you were able to roll it out over a smaller piece of steps. And so that's where what led us to this concept of, okay, we could have started with a marketplace. Here you have a bunch of people looking for jobs,
Mhm.
you have a bunch of job, but this is very tough to launch and to scale, right? You have to solve for both sides of the market. So what we identified at the earliest stage was, okay, the biggest problem is the resume. It's the information on there. It doesn't have what I want to see as an employer or who I'm hiring for. You're using it for multiple different instances. And then we have new problems now that we didn't have when we started. We'll talk about those later. But the point, the point being is that the piece of paper was the problem, right? And so if
Yeah.
we eliminated this and we got rid of it and we started to bring in profiles, okay, well, how do those profiles get distributed, right? So we really identified early on that it can't be a marketplace. What it has to be is tools for each side. So we had to start with the resume and the profile first and say, okay, if we're going to make and redefine what this means, it has to be an efficient and effective tool for the job seeker first and foremost. So we said, we'll start with these profiles. And instead of just saying, okay, they're digital profiles and how can you use them? Well, you can only use them to apply for jobs on platform. That's not good enough. You need to be able to take that profile and make it useful. And so that's where we started off with our first opportunity and grant that we worked on with the federal government to turn them into high functioning ATS ready and AI ready PDF exports. And so through that process, we were able to make it a very effective tool for candidates to come on, build their profiles, and then use them to apply for jobs anywhere. And so that became at its standpoint and at its get-go a useful product.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, thinking about that, because my next question was to me like, when did you like realize you really have something here? And maybe it was that moment. Because that I don't know, maybe there was another moment too, but like when did you say like, wow, something's clicking, we're really onto something.
Yeah, so that moment was the beginning of the entryway to
Yeah.
what I thought was the defining moment. So by creating these profiles and getting them online, we then, showed students, we did a ton of research where we went to schools, we went to different classes, got feedback, got information, and that was exciting. People were telling us this was useful, this was great. But really when that light bulb came off was when we started to build the employer side, allowing employers to access our dynamic work profiles and really giving us that feedback like, hey, this is way better
Yeah.
than resumes. All the data is in one place. It's structured. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand. I have everything that I need to know about the candidate, or at least begin that process to qualify them to know whether they're going to be a good fit for the job. Availability, skills. It's in a clean and easy to read format. I can see a picture of the person if they chose to upload it. I can see a video of them speaking and introducing themselves if they chose to create one. And through this process where employers were telling us, hey, these profiles are great, that's when we knew we had something to go off of.
Awesome. Yeah. Imagine more than just a piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things I want to get into, because this comes up all the time, and I hear you probably hear this day in and day out, is about ethical, human-centric AI. And as an ethical AI organization, person yourself, reducing bias and creating fairer hiring processes, what does ethical AI mean to you? And how do you bring that philosophy into product design?
Yeah. So I think it starts at what ethics means. It's like,
Yeah.
for me, ethics goes hand in hand with integrity. And the easiest way I love to call it is like what doing the right thing even when no one's looking, right? And so that by default is what drove this idea of like, hey, we're getting this information from people who are going to trust us with giving their details and their personal information to gain work and gain and employment. some of these resumes, that we heard about early on and we received were had information like passport numbers, banking
Wow.
information, things that should not be on a resume, but the students and these early candidates thought that this was going to expedite their process. Like if they gave all the information up front, maybe it would help them with the onboarding process or the onboarding flows. And we realized like, okay, well, if we're ingesting these into our database and then we're keeping these files, like we're storing information that essentially you could use to start a credit app or something, a credit
Yeah.
card, even with all of this data that's available on a single piece of paper. So that's early on where we realized, okay, we don't need everything that's on a resume. What we need to do is take that PDF as a starting point. And we always talk about no shit work, right? So this is something that we see all the time. You go to an application process, says upload your resume, then you upload your resume, and then it says, okay, tell us about work experience number one. The work experience, you have to retype it in. We said, listen, the resume is just a starting point of the information we want to capture. So we're going to ingest it. We're going to use AI to extract the data and put it into a structured data set. And we're just going to be really good at that. So let's start there. Let's make it an experience when a candidate uploads their resume. It's going to go into this structured data set and they're going to say, wow, that's exactly how I want every application form to work. And so this was where we started. And we knew that after we did that and got it into structured data, anything that we didn't need that was on the PDF, we could dump it and get rid of it.
Yeah.
That way, it's not staying in our servers. It doesn't live with us. It's the candidate's information. They just used it as a framework and a tool to make their onboarding process easier and more efficient. From there, we started doing things and saying, okay, because we got rid of that PDF and we said, okay, there's so many companies now, they're doing AI matching. They're saying, hey, we can match you with this job and see how well they do. If you're using a PDF to do that as your starting point, you're taking all of that PII and putting it into these LLMs, which are just big black boxes. So now you're taking this information, which likely should not go in there. Number one, the stuff that shouldn't even be on the resume.
Right.
And number two, you're taking all of the PII that's associated with it, where they went to school, the location, what dates they went to school, their age, maybe if they have date of birth, their surnames, and all of the things that create demographics, and you're putting it into this LLM. And by default, this creates an uncertainty of like, how are you processing this information and what are you doing with it? And so we realized early on, we said, we don't want to do that. Even if we don't have matching right away, that's not the process that we want to provide. We want to do this ethically and responsibly. And so that's where we set off to create our bias resistant matching algorithm, which by default extracts, because we have structured data, takes out all of the PII, air gaps it, and then only allows the information that's objective to the candidate and the job description information that's objective to go into the matching algorithm. And so that is where we set the foundation of ethical process, is just doing the right things from the get-go and not having to wait until compliance, regulatory
Right.
rules, all of these things. Like you don't need to wait until those things happen to make good ethical decisions. You just have to do them right from the beginning.
Exactly. Exactly. Great feedback. So I want to talk a little bit about AI with students because I think I'm curious what your thoughts are around the mindset and the skill set students should start to think about with engaging with AI, and if you had any thoughts or insights for maybe our listeners around that.
Yeah, I think that it all goes back to the foundation and fundamentals, right?
Right.
And so, just like anything in life, you go back to the basics. Back to the basics is understanding the data that you're using first, right? So what isn't the information? Does it have sensitive data? Is it something that should be staying within an organization? Is it stuff that should be secure? Is it even clean and normalized data, right? And so going back to the fundamentals and the foundation of understanding the information that you're working with first before you start to pour the gasoline, which is AI, on top of it, right? So really, we have to be understanding of what we're using first before we introduce something that's going to accelerate it. So AI is a great accelerator. It is not a great tool to begin if you don't understand what you're working with. And so that goes hand in hand with code, right?
Right.
So nowadays we're seeing a lot more code being generated through AI.
Yeah.
And one thing that the risk that comes into play is this risk of what we call technical debt. You're allowing the AI to create the code, it's building the tools that you want, but the second there's a bug or there's an issue with that code and you don't understand what has been written, you can fall into a deep dive of issues or um, you know time sink into something that was created quickly, but now because it was created quickly and you don't understand how it was created, you don't know how to go back and fix it. So that's really where the foundations come into play. So whether it's data or whether it's code, you should know and understand what you're working with first,
Yeah.
the languages, the syntax, understanding how to apply it, and then you can bring AI in to accelerate the process.
That makes sense. I think a lot of, or I've seen lately, a lot of younger people too are leaning so heavy into the AI that it actually loses the human element of what they're trying to achieve or tell their story.
Mm.
And that can also become a problem if, and I've heard it recently at a conference where they were reading these things saying, this doesn't even sound like a person, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you got to be wary of that too. Like, as a tool, it's great, but you also have to check what it's saying about yourself, even, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because you're putting that out with your name, right? It's like, okay, is this me or is this something that I wrote? Was there critical thinking behind it? Did you
Yeah,
understand what you were asking it,
to do.
sending it out into the world because the AI said it's ready, you know?
Yeah,
Did you proofread it? Did you take out the M dashes? Those things
yeah,
that come from, knowing that it's ChatGPT and, relating that not just to code and data, but also to the AI resumes that are being written and the cover letters that are going out. It's like, well, is that actually you or is that your chat GPT's rendition of what it thinks you should say?
100%. 100%. So thinking too now about companies, because companies are engaging with Picsume and you're talking to multiple companies across Canada. Um, I know a lot of companies are thinking, well, my employers are ahead of it more than I am, but how do I adopt it in a way that enhances trust rather than eroding it? And any thoughts around what companies should be thinking about as they're entering into this, I guess, entering or falling into this space?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. We hear a lot about this, about how other companies can start to adopt AI. I think there's two pieces to this. There's one, the internal, and
Okay.
two, the external functions.
Yeah.
Internally, that we're seeing, resistance and fear around, hey, is AI going to take a job? And I actually saw a statistic today that any of these given LLMs only have the ability to 2% automate an entire workflow end to end. 2% of jobs are only able to be automated end to end. So that gives you a really good understanding that I think the news and the narrative out there around AI taking jobs or taking away opportunities is just not founded yet that it's going to be a significant problem for our current society or current generation. That's just my perspective in it.
Yeah.
And based off of that stat, it was really interesting to hear that only 2% of jobs could be fully automated currently. So going back to the internal and external, it's like, well, internally, how do I, as a leader, help to have my team learn how we're going to utilize AI within an organization, how we're going to adopt it ethically and responsibly, and really giving them the guidelines to do so before they just decide to do it on their own, whether it's with personal accounts or with their own, with their own accounts that they're spinning up. And so getting ahead of it to say, here's the boundaries, here's the guardrails. Don't obviously no customer data, no sensitive information, no banking details, no financial details, these type of things, setting the clear guardrails and restrictions, providing the accounts, saying here, responsibility per sales department or marketing or internally within IT or within HR. Here's how we should use AI. And so by getting ahead of it and saying, listen, these are for you to accelerate your workflows, to help you take these mundane tasks and expedite them, and to provide efficiencies and acceleration in the existing work that is done, not to take away work or remove responsibility from your job. And so getting ahead of it and making sure that number one, you know what you're solving for first. So not just saying, go and use AI. Well, what are you using AI? What problems, what workflows can be used to accelerate? And what data is structured enough? Do you have the right data? Are you starting from a place where you're ready to introduce AI? And then working within your organization to say, create the right narrative and create the right boundaries so that you can have trust to know that this implementation is not going to affect you. It's just going to help you as part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the external side, are you referring to like people using it to do their own marketing of their company and things like
Yeah,
that?
exactly. So how you start to go out with AI, right? So we talk about that authenticity and this process of like how you're operating externally with the world. So whether that's as sales, with marketing, or even we're talking about HR and how you're
Yeah,
working within hiring and candidates, how you're managing that external view of AI and your organization, what it means. And so we talk about authenticity is like, okay, are you creating using AI to craft all of your posts, and is it generated with AI? Because now people's eyes are getting familiar. Say, oh, you
yeah,
scrolling through, you're like, oh, that's AI generated. Now, what does that mean for your organization? If someone sees it, are they going to pay attention or are they going to look away because automatically they've identified that it's an AI generated image or it's an AI generated post? And so you really have to be cognizant of what does it mean for your brand if you're putting this out? Is it just another post in the LinkedIn world, or is it something of sustenance? Is it something of value? Are you creating something that is worthwhile? And that doesn't mean you can't use AI to create something of value or something of worthwhile, but you have to know what that means for your organization when you do put this information out. And you have to be strategic. What are we creating? What is going to create value? And then use AI to generate that outcome.
I'd love to lean into that as another podcast because there's a lot of chatter on this right now.
Mm,
Because, the AI can enhance your brand for sure,
that's right.
right? And then people are afraid, but if I'm providing advice or a legal counsel or something, and now it's all coming out of, well, that's AI said it. I don't know if that's how they think or what they market. Um, I think this is also a really cool cutting edge space to be in right now. And with your marketing passion and stuff. I'd love to talk more about that maybe even on another podcast because I think we could get a lot of people talking about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the foundation of AI internally, the part that I would say at the end of this is that before you head into it, you have to know what problems you're solving. You can't just take it and say, okay, now we have AI. What do we do? It's you have to really have identified the problems. You have to know what data is really ready to be accelerated. And if it's no, then you should work on identifying and clearly mapping out those workflows before you bring AI or automation into that space. So I think that's a good foundation internally to start with.
Yeah, 100%. So let's lean into athletics. You're also a passionate soccer player, a lifetime
Yeah.
athlete. You and I have talked about this a bit.
Yeah. For sure.
How has the mindset of discipline, teamwork, strategy influenced from your sports and your abilities there into the way you lead at Picsume?
Amazing. So I want to start with a backstory. So
Yeah,
when
yeah,
I
go for
when
it.
I finished college, like I played soccer obviously all through, it's been 30 years. I'm still playing pretty regularly.
Right.
When I finished college and I got into workforce, I was Nick the soccer guy, even in the remote world, like that was, it was a big part of my identity.
Yeah.
And it was like what I focused on my entire life. I played at a high level. I was always thinking in things relative to what I knew, right? Which was soccer and what that meant. And it doesn't mean just the sport, but what it means is the teamwork and all of the pieces around it. And I remember having this point where I was like, soccer doesn't matter to the work that I do. It's web, it's two different worlds.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I realized that the overlap is so significant, the relationship underneath them between, let's just take the world of web development and building teams around that implementation or that execution and the teams that came from that I knew growing up as a child, they were very much relevant. And once I leaned into it was when my leadership began to blossom. And it's like that's where my leadership skills began to come out. And I realized, oh,
Love
this
that.
all relates. It all makes sense. And so in the aspects of teamwork specifically, it's like you put together people, whether it's a soccer team, you could go into, I love this term called teaming. I don't know if you've ever heard this term, Brian, but it's when a group of people who are skilled at something come together and they might not work together on a long period of time. And so some people that do teaming are like search and rescue, military, first responders, things like that. People who are, proficient in their job and then all of a sudden have to come together in an immediate opportunity and collaborate. And you might do that often teaming with inside of your schoolwork, right? So you're put together on a project, you have to
Right.
work with people right away. You might not know them, you might not have interfaced with them in a project before, but you all of a sudden have to take all of your collective skills and work on a project collectively together. So the question comes from that, how well are you able to establish what is need to be done collectively? Who is going to lead the process of identifying what these steps are to be successful or to have a successful implementation or execution? So defining success and then helping people understand their responsibility as part of that success. And I think the most important part of all of it that we learn through sports is helping people to understand that they're in a safe place to have confidence to do what their responsibility is to contribute to the team, right? And this goes back into, my time coaching and my time making sure that young athletes or people that I was coaching had an opportunity to shine within the team. It's not always about skill and capability. Sometimes a lot of it has to do with confidence and their ability to know that they are capable. And I think this is a great lesson for, anybody, but people coming through school today is that a lot of times it's not about your capability. A lot of times it more has to do with, do you believe in yourself? Do you believe that you're capable to contribute, to provide a successful outcome to a collective group and a collective mission? And through that confidence that you gain this responsibility and the ability to understand that you are able to contribute, you are able to succeed, and you are able to play a part in a successful outcome. And so I think those are some of the foundations of what I learned through athletics that apply in the workspace or in school or wherever it is that you're coming a team.
It's great. It's a great lesson. It's great insights for even student athletes listening, or even early in career, or even people who are athletically inclined. I think, too often we don't think that they merge, and you just showed how it happened for you, and how when you realized that you blossomed in leadership. What do you think about how business leaders can learn from athletes when it comes to building resilient and high performing teams? Because I think there's a lot to unpack with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a whole, you
A
talk
whole
about the marketing,
podcast.
that's a whole
Yeah.
podcast in itself, but I think there's a few things that we can touch on as far as being a business leader and what that means to be a good coach, right? It's like
Yeah.
if you take business leader and someone who is leading a group of people, I think number one, you have to understand the group together, right? And you have to bring everyone to the same table. So you have to have this feeling of equality together collectively. And I think the best business leaders are not specifically leaders, they're facilitators. So
Mm,
understanding that the leader has a responsibility, and that responsibility is to the group, not just leading the group. So no, the biggest thing that we see in successful leaders is their understanding that they are there to serve the team.
yeah.
We hear that all the time. It's like servant leadership and things like
Yeah.
that. But really understanding that you have to serve the people that are doing the effort first, and by understanding them, you have a better opportunity at leading them to success.
Yeah.
So that's where the empathy, I think, always comes into play. It's like, one of the things that I always doing is one-on-ones. So talking with the team individually, scheduling a recurring one-on-one, making sure they feel comfortable, not just with the group, but first with me.
Yeah.
Once they feel confident and comfortable with the leader or the facilitator, then they can go on and say that they're in a safe place. They're in a place where they can contribute and they know that they have the ability to make a difference within the group. If you have this trust and this confidence built in from the foundation, then you're able to bring the group together. Okay, now each one has this baseline of confidence or capability that know that they belong there. Once you have that foundation and you introduce it to the group, you allow them to understand that they are the safe place for one another as well. So the real great teams don't just have cohesion with the leader, they have cohesion amongst each other. So
That's true.
the glue happens between the people and it actually happens between the work. And that was one thing that I identified early on in my career was like great teams they don't actually happen on the soccer field. They happen off the field. And so going
Interesting.
to
Yeah.
tournaments together, you know,
Yeah.
if you think about youth sports, you go to tournament together, you eat dinner together, have a pizza after the game. All of those things are what creates the foundation and the bond between the players. And that is an essential part of great teams, right? So great teams aren't always great leaders. They're the ones that have this glue that are willing to stick together.
Awesome.
Uh, and so once they've built the foundation individually and they have that confidence, they have to know how to serve one another, right? So if we're talking, you know, just from athletics, it's like, hey, this person in this position, when I pass them the ball, they like to receive the ball in this way, or I know how I have to distribute my work to them. And if you relate that to how you know web development works, or some, you know, uh, you could relate it to other fields, but in the field of web development, you know, if you have a backend developer who's developing the APIs or the backend of the code, they know how they're going to set up and serve the front end developer for success
Yeah.
because they've communicated with each other. They know one another. They feel comfortable passing this information along. Even more so, they feel comfortable asking, hey, how can I help you win? How can I help you succeed? And understanding their role and knowing that the glue between them is what's going to make the rest of the team strong. And so
Yeah.
I think those, you know, that's just a really small but simple analogy. And I think it
Yeah.
goes
No,
back
it's
to, like we
great.
said, trusting the leader, right, as a
Yeah.
facilitator and not just a director, trusting amongst themselves, know that they're in a safe place and learn how to help one another succeed. And ultimately, those core items are what's going to bring out the foundation of a great team.
Amazing. Yeah. 100%. It goes back to the human connection
Yeah,
altogether, right?
yeah,
Um, so I know we're getting close to the end, but I have a couple more things I want to hit on before we jump off here. One is AI hiring, Pixame. What do you see happening with tools like Pixame creating a more transparent and equitable job market? Where do you see this going?
yeah. I think there's two parts, right? For the candidates, number one, it's understanding this is something, Brian, you know, I've learned from you really well is like helping the candidates, especially in the early stages of their career and these emerging talent, to understand their value to the workplace, right?
Yeah,
And how do they help to create an experience which showcases their value? And so then once they've established and they demonstrated it, not just who they are, but where they want to go. So setting their preferences of what type of work that they want to do, what type of industries they want to work in. For Pixame, what it means is helping those candidates who join the platform find the opportunities that closely resonate with them, not getting on a job board and seeing there's 3,000 jobs in your area. It's like, well, maybe instead of showing 3,000, we show 30 that are great for you. And you get to see that on a week to week basis and know that you're being presented with opportunities that reflect your capability, your values, and your desired outcome.
yeah, absolutely. I think what you're creating with Pixame too is back to those curious folks and people that have that curiosity is you're creating an exploration and a journey map to kind of explore these things. And I think that's one thing we lose sight of when we're looking for jobs is this is an experience to like explore, find out what you love, what you want to continue to do, what you want to maybe go off-roading on for a bit. And with Pixame as that journey map, I think you guys are creating something that really helps the candidate beyond that as well as we build this out more.
Yeah, I agree, and that's I think that's where the foundation always comes from. It's right. It's the candidate first, the candidate understanding, having them have a great experience and be able to showcase themselves well is what's going to set up the employers for success, right? So for the employer side, as we continue to grow here, is making sure that these candidates have the ability to have a great intake experience. So being able to onboard and apply for a job, that's a good experience because that ultimately reflects the brand of the employer, right? You get
100%.
onto you get onto an ATS system, you're like, oh, this job's awesome. It's exactly what I want. And then you run into, oh, register for your account. Oh, answer these questions. Yeah, upload your resume. And it's just like jumping through hoops that create friction and frustration when this might deter great candidates. And so for employers, it's not about changing your workflows, but it's about helping them to put software in front that helps to reduce that friction to allow the candidates to onboard through using structured data and then being able for Picsume to structure that data and pass it along to the existing ATS or HRIS systems that they're already familiar with and already use. And so that's where we've set our foundation to be a great candidate intake platform and allow it to support not just the candidates, but by serving the candidates well, we have a great foundation and springboard for the employers to leverage that.
It's amazing. I have one last thing. If I could end on that because that was pretty cool, but
Yeah.
I did have this one thing, and I don't know if you had something to say here, so I want to give you a shot if you did. Um, Listeners we have here, youth, people looking for new careers, pivoting in their life, doing different things. Listeners listening to like your journey, your what you've learned, what you're doing now. Any like I don't want to say general, but because I guess it could be general across all those, but any advice or perspectives you want to leave the listeners with before we
Yeah,
stop?
I think the sentiment we're all seeing is that the market is tough right there
Yeah.
right now. And to be ignorant of that as a company that is in the space, I think that does disservice to the process. So to the struggles that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis and the internal friction and second guessing yourself that comes from it. And so, it goes back to this athlete mindset. So not just in teams, but as an individual contributor, right? As an individual person, how do you find that grit to succeed, to win, and to compete, right? So as the job market becomes more competitive, it must bring up something within you to show that I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to be more bold. And I know, I don't want to sound like that I'm ignorant to the process that, technology has been put in place to make things efficient and not personable, but there's still things that we can do. There's still things that, a young person can do to stand out and to make themselves, to showcase their value. It requires that determination every day to say that I'm not just going to apply to 100, I'm going to apply to 10 really great jobs and I'm going to put a ton of effort into understanding the role, understanding the person who's hiring, reaching out on LinkedIn, research the company, do the things that others are not doing. And so I think through that process, just from a hiring standpoint, is figuring out, how to do those things well and to do instead of spreading yourself thin over across multiple 500 applications, to do 10 really good ones and see where that nets you.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Nick, your story from the soccer field to the coding field shows us that leadership, like sport, is about vision, teamwork, and mostly heart. And from my heart, I want to thank you
Uh,
for joining me on this podcast today and sharing all your insights, all your thoughts, all your great ideas, and also your passion. I really thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. It was really humbling, and I don't do a lot of these, but it was a really great honor to be on your podcast specifically because I think you've had so many great guests and conversations, and you and I really resonate well, and so it's such an honor to be part of this podcast. And so thanks you so much for giving me a venue to share my passion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We might have to come back for round two on some more marketing.
All
Uh,
right.
To all our listeners, if today's episode inspired you, share it with a young innovator, a fellow technologist, or a business leader exploring the future of AI and heart. Subscribe to Coffee with Convery and follow us on Instagram for more stories that connect us. You can also follow us on coffeewithconvery.com. This is Coffee with Convery, where we remind you that success doesn't always come from climbing the corporate ladder. It sometimes comes from building your own jungle gym.
Love that.